Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. First order of business, Reginald, thank you again for sending another candle. This one's larger than the last one. Beautiful candles. Thank you for the gift. As you all know, candles aren't cheap anymore, so I digress, though. It's the size, the beauty. It's unscented, so no worries there. I actually, the other than thanking you, I want you to know, in case you were wondering, why you're not seeing it here on the altar. I would like to use these for the altar since they are a Myoho gift, yes. But they're not white. I don't know. I may have to make an exception to that rule. But I want you to know they are going to good use. Here in Mississippi, some would say that we're somewhat plagued by a sensitive electric grid. And even though I've installed a lot of solar on this school building, the power companies here have made it impossible for me to ration that so I can sell, but it's complicated. I just don't have the money really to buy a battery wall so that I can power everything here off of the solar panels, which would mean, long story short, more reliable power and less power outages. All of that is to say the candles are going to good use. We have lots of power outages here. Many are short, but some are extended. And these candles, I mean, as I've already stated, candles in general, not cheap, especially good ones that will burn a long time and not make a lot of other hassles. So anyway, thank you for that. Your gifts are tremendously appreciated. And if at some point I relax my what is it, obsession with precision, which is, I agree, unachievable. I would love to put them here on the altar and use them so that they could be used in this context. But I just wanted you to know why they haven't made it here so far is simply because they're not white, and I'm adhering to that convention, yeah. And go ahead and chime in. I'm saying this so all of you can chime in on, what your thoughts are on that. Maybe just because of the karmic intent, right? Attitude and intent. We talk about it all the time. Maybe I should just forego that tradition and, offer these candles up to Namo Myoho Renge Kyo, Gohanzon, as it were. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to continue with this relatively short, small book of the Vimalakirti Sutra, a sutra which every time I reread it, I'm reminded of the fundamentals of this practice. We are, of course, Lotus Sutra Buddhists, and we practice the culminating teachings of Shakyamuni. This is why we chant Namo Myoho Renge Kyo, but some of these earlier Mahayana sutras are really good in their verbiage, even in their translations, for nailing down the fundamentals of why we chant Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. How did we get to that in the scholarship of Buddhism, yeah? So Vimalakirti is a man whom we're going to now, I think, we're in the expedient means chapter now, but I think at this point, at some point very near here, if not in this first reading, we're going to be introduced to Vimalakirti, the man himself, and what his accolades are and what he represents. Remember, everything in Buddhism is a story encapsulated in a certain mind, a mind being an emergent property of a human being, a sentient being, yeah? So Vimalakirti is one of these men. Whether he existed or not isn't important. What is important is what characterizes this important figure in the practice of Buddhism. What example does he present us with? Is he an embodiment of a bodhisattva? Is he an embodiment of a great patron? Who is this man, Vimalakirti, and why is he so important that this sutra, this teaching, is named after him? Must be a reason, right? Same reason as Vairocana Buddha, or Mahavairocana, if you will, or Amida, or any of these characters. They have sutras named after them because they are the exemplar, the carrier of the message of the expedient means, the teachings. You see, there's a very strong consistency. And unless you practice or study outside of the one sutra, you might not know that. I would argue that many do not know that. That all of these earlier sutras are sutras, their teachings, their stories, their teaching aids, their elucidations, their attempts at sparking insights. Yeah? And so this story centers around a man named Vimalakirti. And with that introduction, we start the expedient means chapter of this sutra. At that time, in the great city of Vaishali, I keep saying Vaishali, there was a rich man named Vimalakirti. Well, there you go, first sentence. So it's interesting, wealth is a component of this person. Can't lose sight of any of these little descriptives because they indicate, remember the caste system? And you could say, well, that's India, but we're all in a caste system. We're all caste as a certain parameterized identifier within the culture, the society, the group. Yeah, we all are. This is human data collection and cubbyholing. It's what we do, par excellence. I wouldn't call it excellence. I'd call it par. Can't escape from. It's just our nature. Yes? Already in the past, he had offered alms to immeasurable numbers of Buddhas, had deeply planted the roots of goodness, and had grasped the truth of birthlessness. Okay, so in just a couple of sentences, we've identified this wealthy man as somebody who has a great good fortune in his life, right? That's part of being wealthy. Is a lot of obstacles are handled for him right off the bat. And he's good-natured enough and paying attention enough and wise enough to have studied Buddhism specifically, because of the verbiage here, supported others in their monks in their path to Buddha-ness, yeah, and has grasped through his insights, participation, learning from these monks you would think that he's supporting, the truth of the empty nature of thingness. So he's well on his way to his own path, along his path to awakening, yeah, to Buddha. Unhindered in his eloquence, so he speaks well, able to disport himself with transcendental powers, has very controlled, he's not emotional, right? He's able to see, how would I say it? as an observer rather than, what's the dichotomy there? Subjective rather than objective. He's more objective than subjective. That's what we indicate by transcendental powers. He's able to not be so affected by every little thing, so he can remain in control of his facilities. Yes. He commanded full retention of the teachings and had attained the state of fearlessness. Oh, well, obviously then, he's very studied in Buddhism. He's learned a great deal, and he's already well on his path to awakening, right? He had overcome the torments and ill will of the devil and entered deeply into the doctrine of the law, proficient in the paramita of wisdom, and a master in employing of the expedient means. Well, I mean, obviously, he's at the stage of bodhisattva. He not only understands for himself what's going on, but he's able to communicate the teachings of Buddhism to others. That's quite something. Quite an accomplished man, this Vimalakirti, yeah? He had successfully fulfilled his great vow and could clearly discern how the minds of others were tending. Moreover, he could distinguish whether their capacities were keen or obtruse. Expedient means, right? How shall I address this person's conditions and tendencies given their state of mind versus somebody who's more able to conceive of the teachings of Shakyamuni? And how shall I teach each one so they continue to progress? This is a difficult thing to discern, and it takes a lot of practice and one's own awakenings, right, along the way, one's own insights, to be able to judge that with any accuracy. His mind was cleansed and purified through long practice of the Buddha way. Okay, obviously. Firm in its grasp of the great vehicle. Okay, well, definitely Mahayana. That's the great vehicle. And all his actions were well thought out and planned. So this is a very respectable individual, yes? Well practiced, very focused in his practice. Perhaps his wealth is what offers him the opportunity of time to study with the monks, so that he too, as a layman, can gain that wisdom. Excellent. He maintained the dignity and authority of a Buddha, and his mind was vast as the sea. All the Buddhas sighed with admiration, and he commanded the respect of the disciples of Indra, Brahma, and the four heavenly kings. Well, now we've put him at an even higher status, haven't we? So those other monks who claim to have experienced awakening, enlightenment, respect him as a student of Shakyamuni, someone who has many of the qualities that one would aspire to in attaining Buddhahood. So this Vimalakirti is not just some old guy with money. He's a very dedicated student. In fact, he's more than a student. He's a scholar because he shares the teachings, and he shares the teachings appropriately, depending on who he's speaking with, their mental capacity. We should all hope for that ourselves, yeah? Well, so he's kind of an exemplar. Wow. Okay, Vimalakirti. Let's find out more. Desiring to save others, Bodhisattva, save, liberate. Desiring to emancipate, liberate others, right? Save. Yeah, I keep hitting on this, but you got to know this kind of rhetoric makes us stumble, because that kind of rhetoric, saving others, is like we can't do for ourselves, right? To be saved means you don't know how to swim. You have to be pulled out of the water. Well, that's absolute opposite of Buddhism. It would be, in that analogy, more accurate to say, hey, before you drown over there flailing in the water, this is how you swim. Now swim. Oh, I'm no longer drowning. That's much closer to Buddhism. I didn't save you. I enabled your potential to manifest. Stop drowning yourself. Liberate yourself from the idea that you're in chaos and can't control the situation, and know that this is just yours to control. Just do it. Here, I'll give you some examples. But you have to do it. See, that's an emancipation. That's a liberation. That's not saving. Saving has that charisma of something outside of you rescuing you. See why words are slippery? And we're Western folks. The people on this podcast or on this channel, generally Western. I get some people from, our friends in Taiwan or Shanghai or even China tend to be students from Western worlds. But Western, that terminology is breaking down more and more year after year, right? Although culturally we do have very different perspectives. What's important to realize is this is an English translation using the word desiring to save others, because it's his desire to enact this on others. There's the implication in simple language that he will do something to rescue others rather than doing something to empower others to save themselves. It may seem petty, but it's deeply at the heart of our understanding of Buddhism. So again, I caution you, when you read these things, be critical for your own practice, for your own understanding. Yeah? He employed the excellent expedient of residing in Vaishali. So I guess Vaishali was a center where there were occasion to meet many people who were seeking Buddhist practice, perhaps. His immeasurable riches he used to relieve the poor. Well, that's a good use of the word. Relieving the poor isn't showing them how not to be poor, is it? That's a proper English word. He's got a lot of money, so he's helping them to feed themselves. He's helping them to house themselves. But he's the benefactor here. He's relieving their condition. He's not teaching them how to get out of their condition. He's just relieving it. So just these two sentences alone have made me keenly aware to carefully read this sutra, yes? His faultless observation of the precepts served as a reproach to those who would violate prohibitions. So he was quick to point out people's misconceptions. So that can be a very helpful thing if it's done in a helpful way, yes? Through his restraint and forbearance, he warned others against rage and anger, and his great assiduousness discouraged all thought of sloth and indolence. So he's a very positive influence. Remember, I talk about influence all the time. So when he walked through town, people felt like they needed to behave better. His example of being made them feel more responsible, showing more restraint in their emotions. Well, that's pretty amazing, yes? Concentrating his single mind in quiet meditation, he suppressed disordered thoughts. Through firm and unwavering wisdom, he overcame all that was not wise. So this paragraph describes Vimalakirti's practice of the 6 paramitas, which you can look up. So he's following early teachings of Buddhism on behavior. all the way back to the Eightfold Noble Path, right? Very much a prescription on how to behave in a life-affirming, value-creating, Buddha way sort of life, yeah? And so obviously he meditated on this because he's a man, a human sentient being. He's going to be pulled this way and that, no matter what his financial fortunes are. He's emotional, he's a man, and he remains, because of his assiduous meditation, constantly aware of the distractions in his life and how to avoid being dragged into lesser behaviors, right? So this is quite an accomplished gentleman, yes. Though dressed in the white robes of a layman, he observed all the rules of pure conduct laid down for monks, and though he lived at home, he felt no attachment to the threefold world. One could see that he had a wife and children, and yet he was at all times chaste in action. He wasn't lascivious, he wasn't flirtatious, right? Obviously, he had kin and household attendants, yet he was always delighted in withdrawing from them. He didn't have to have a retinue following him around just to demonstrate all of his wealth and status, yes? Although he wore jewels and finery, his real adornment was the auspicious marks. Although he ate and drank like others, what he truly savored was the joy of meditation. So, this is a wealthy man, and he doesn't hide his wealth, but he doesn't flaunt it either. And he uses his influence, his power of wealth and status, to, as well as he can, benefit others. This is a model citizen, yes? And he's actually, the description a little earlier about him wearing the robes of a layman kind of indicates that he's what the Japanese call nyudo, which I've often called myself. As I'm a monk, as I define a monk to be an assiduous student of Buddhism, but I exist among the people. I'm not in some vaulted place or some secluded monastery or any of that. That's no longer appropriate in our modern age. In order to practice Buddhism fully and to enlighten ourselves quickly, right? Namo Myo Renge Kyo. Our practice entails our bodhisattva-ness. We need to course through the world as bodhisattvas. And the only way to do that is to rub up against each other. We learn and we grow and we awaken to the very same degree as we influence others to do the same, to follow their path to awakening. It's a more difficult path, you could say, very justifiably, because one of the first things that Shakyamuni did in the early days of his teachings of Buddhism was to sequester all the men. Go in a rock box so that you cannot be influenced by the scent, the appearance, the curves of a woman, because you guys you're either farming or screwing. I mean, there's very little else in the world that captures the attention of a man, especially 3,000 years ago when there weren't cell phones and TVs and radios and distractions and hobbies, right? Hobbies were really either the very narrow province of artisans who weren't wealthy, but they were all mechanisms of wealth creation. They were mercantile, yeah? Or you worked the land or the livestock. I mean, that was it. After that, it's all about physical needs, which is either food or the other F word. So it was absolutely necessary to sequester, to get control of those desires. But that's 3,000 years ago. That's 2,000 years. That's 1,000 years ago. But it's not now. It's not today in the latter day of the law. Now, I would argue that our desires are so preeminent because they're constantly bombarded with distractions to take advantage of them, that your relationship with your phone and its advertising mediums and it's pouring into your brain messages about what you should be, what you should have, what you should look like, is more powerful than your sex drive. Somehow all tied to it because it's all ego. But I digress. If he visited the gambling parlors, it was solely to bring enlightenment to those there. Well, and now we're getting, okay, are we talking about sainthood here? Basically, the point's being made that this guy is attempting everything he can in the fiber of his being to be a righteous person, a good man, you might say, but to the point that he's wanting to positively influence his environment directly by visiting its vices. But I don't know about that. I kind of feel two ways about that. It's like, what are you trying to prove? Be who you are. That's amazing. But really, you got to go to the opium dens and the gambling parlors to show, be more like me, be less like you. No, that's kind of judgmental, and I don't know about that. But let's go on. And we're getting the point, though, right? This guy is very righteous. But is he righteous in an arrogant way, or is he righteous because he's aware of what is righteousness, rather than using it as a weapon, weaponizing righteousness, right? We see a lot of that throughout the world, and so I don't want to slip into that understanding. If he listened to the doctrines of other religions, he did not allow them to impinge on the true conviction. Right, because we meet people every day from all sorts of faiths, and we don't have to castigate them or knock them down, but we don't allow them to influence our perspectives. So if and when we need to engage with them conversantly, what comes out of our mouth should be based solidly on Buddhism and not trying to use their words to convince them otherwise. That's a fool's errand. Once you start using their rhetoric, then you've lost yours. Do not do that. So this is what this means, not allowing them to impinge on the true conviction of Buddha-ness, yeah? Though well versed in secular writings, like, he knows non-Buddhist texts as well as Buddhist texts. Like I've often mentioned Michel Foucault or Aristotle and so on and so forth, right? His constant delight was in the Buddhist law. Well, that's where you find the most enlightening, inspiring stories, right? The expedient means. They are the source of great moments of introspection and discovery, and obviously that would be our preferred reading. It doesn't mean that's the only thing we read, though, right? Respected by everyone, so he was very respected. He was looked on as foremost among those deserving of alms, embracing and upholding the correct Dharma. He gave guidance to old and young. So he really lived his life as a secular monk, as a nudo. Yeah? In a spirit of trust and harmony, he conducted all kinds of business and enterprises, but though he reaped worldly profits, he took no delight in these. They're just the business of keeping the community vibrant and alive. Commerce, right, wasn't his. He took joy in his ability to be able to do it. He had the wealth and the connections. But he did it for the health of the humans in the society he was in. Not to make wild profits right? Money didn't drive him, but he respected the power of money. So he dealt in that realm. Okay, I get that. Another admirable quality, right? He frequented the busy crossroads in order to bring benefit to others, entering the government offices and courts of law so as to aid and rescue all those he could. There's that word, rescue. Okay. He visited the places of debate in order to guide others to the great vehicle, so he was an influence toward Mahayana. Visited the schools and study halls to further the instruction of the pupils. And notice there, the instruction of the pupils weren't in Buddhism. It was just instruction in general. Learning how to read and write. Learning the great classics. Right? The respect for the cultivation of the mind. That's a very important part of our practice of Buddhism. He entered houses of ill fame to teach the folly of fleshly desires. Okay, now he's going to whorehouses to teach them not to be, not to stay in the world of being whores, flesh for money, in other words. Now we're starting to tread on Jesus territory. I'm not comfortable with this either. All of this story is supposed to elevate his stature in the society. Okay, yeah. But I'm highly attuned to being Western, and I grew up Catholic, so that's not lost on me. I just don't want to get lost on it. Entered wine shops in order to encourage those with a will to quiet them. Right? Intoxicants in Buddhism from the very start. Don't muddy your mind. You're having a hard enough time grasping your mind and awakening it. Don't be fouling up the works with intoxicants. Alcohol, weed, pills, whatever. You're diving into the lower realms and obfuscating your Buddha, your Buddha-ness, purposefully. Why would you do that? Why would a track runner burn his legs or kick his toes into the wall and break his feet? Why would a track runner do that? Same thing as taking intoxicants, except that you're breaking the bones of your mind. So yeah, it's just another one of those lists of precepts in the Eightfold Noble Path, and everything after it has been about these prohibitions, quote unquote, of behavior and how they lead directly to the obfuscation of your higher self, your Buddha mind. Yeah? If he was among rich men, they honored him as foremost among them, because he preached the superior law for them. If he was among lay believers, they honored him as foremost because he freed them from greed and attachment. Well, freed them. Well, this is what I was saying earlier. He freed them. He liberated them through teaching them, right? He didn't save them. Among Kshatriyas, he was most highly honored because he taught them forbearance. Among Brahmins, he was most highly honored because he rid them of their self-conceit, their egos. The great ministers honored him as foremost because he taught the correct law, the great vehicle, Mahayana. The princes honored him as foremost because he showed them how to be loyal and filial. It didn't hurt that he was one of them, but he didn't flaunt his wealth. He just knew how to use it. He knew the circles he influenced and the circles he'd be accepted in, and he maintained his composure teaching Buddhism. So he was accepted and respected. Wise, you would say, Buddha wisdom on his exercise of being, yes? Within the women's quarters, there's that early, right? You bring up women and A whole nother stage of behavior comes to light. And within the women's quarters, he was most honored because he converted and brought refinement to the women of the harem. He elevated their self-image, right? Made them think more of themselves than simple sex toys. Although you could argue in harems, there was a lot of competition among the women on who would be the next to bear the important child that would, again, raise their status. But this is all based on sex and female competition and the attraction of men. It's all the same. So the implication here was that when he entered those harems, he didn't do so with an eye on sexuality, on the eye of attractiveness and flirtations, but more as women as equals, women as humans, women as regarding their lives as precious, and raising their minds, raising their opinions, their experiences of self out of simply being, working girls. No matter how vaulted they made that sound, they were essentially sex toys. And the politics that go with it, right? The common people honored him as first among them because he helped them to gain wealth and power. I mean, pages of flattery here. My goodness, Vimalakirti, do you also float? Let's go on. The Brahman deities honored him as first among them because he revealed the superiority of wisdom. Okay, now we're in expedient means, right? We're in conceptual attitude, mind. This is a great big mind experiment, right? So in your mind's imagination, even those vaulted concepts of Brahman deities that are themselves personifications of great behaviors, he is among them. So again, this is just an earthly description, but it's using all of the tools available to the author of this person, presumably Shakyamuni, describing this kind of person. The Indras honored him as first among them because he demonstrated the truth of impermanence. The four heavenly kings, guardians of the world, honored him as foremost because he guarded all living beings. Again, these are all aspects of his beingness. We tend to think of behavior as something we do onto our environment or others, but our behavior in Buddhism is our mind at work. How do we perceive? That's our behavior. The outward expression of our behaviors, that's a whole other matter. Because that's all up to perception of that around us, which is why this dialogue is so lengthy about how he is perceived along with his own internal dialogue, his behavior. There's two components, right? Ourselves and our environment. Always comes back to that. The same thing, but the perception is different. In this way, the rich man, Vimalakirti, employed immeasurable numbers of expedient means in order to bring benefit to others. The best statement made so far, yeah? Using these expedient means, he made it appear that his body had fallen prey to illness. Now we're moving on in time. So he's an aged man. He's starting to enter decrepitude. I relate all too well as I speak to you today with a terrible toothache. So I apologize if my tongue seems thick at some points. Because of his illness, the king of the country, the great ministers, rich men, lay believers, and Brahmins, as well as the princes and lesser officials, numbering countless thousands, all went to see him and inquire about his illness. Wow, our great benefactor, our teacher, our inspiration, walking around town, showing us how to make sustain our life with wealth or money, exchange, commerce, right? High to low, whatever your caste, welcomed and an inspiration to all. He hasn't been coming out lately. What's going on with him? Oh, I heard he's not doing well. I heard his age is starting to take its toll on him. We should go check him out. We should go. I miss him. Where's it? Let's go see if he's okay. Right? Natural process. But with the added auspicious nature of his influence in his environment, this character of Vimalakirti, which all of us would do well to try to emulate, yeah? His support is coming back to check up on him. Vimalakirti then used his bodily illness to expound the law to them in broad terms. Quote, "Good people, this body is impermanent, without durability, without strength, without firmness, a thing that decays in a moment, not to be relied on. It suffers, it is tormented, it's a meeting place of manifold ills." Yeah, but we didn't expect you to feel that. Well, I'm a human just like you guys. Good people, no person of enlightened wisdom could depend on a thing like this body, because it's not the body that is enlightened. It's not the body that is wise. And though we can make many allusions to the body's knowledge, enlightenment, wisdom, is experienced through the mind. Yeah? This body is like a cluster of foam, nothing you can grasp or handle. So this is the concept of emptiness. He's demonstrating that our attachment to fingernails and polish and the size of our muscles and joints and so on and so forth, these are mental constructs. And we can establish them in physical form in our bodies, but that's a temporary, impermanent manifestation. It's not something to be attached to. I know that's a difficult concept, but he's reviewing. This body is like a bubble that cannot continue for long. This body is like a flame born of longing and desire. I want to have these things, so I will have this appearance of thingness in my life. But if that's your goal in life, then you've already fallen. This body is like the plantain that has no firmness in its trunk. This body is like a phantom, the product of error and confusion. The error and confusion is believing that there is enlightenment in these things. These things are the apparatus for the mind to be enlightened. But we tend to do the reverse. We exalt body. We exalt and sensualize and valuate and constantly feed and want to accrue body, right? The entire universe is body. But is the body the point of the universe? If it were, why would there be sentient beings? The process of the universe would just keep going for another few billion years until it got tired of expressing itself or maxed itself out and then just go away, start over, whatever you believe. The point of the universe is to emerge consciousness. This body is like a dream, compounded of false and empty visions. This body is like a shadow appearing through karma causes. The freight train of karma, yeah. This body is like an echo, tied to causes and conditions, tendencies and conditions. This body is like a drifting cloud, changing and vanishing in an instant, in the time scales of the universe, in an instant. This body is like lightning, barely lasting from moment to moment. Gosh, here it is in the Vimalakirti Sutra. Way ahead of the Lotus Sutra. But we're talking about the same things, right? Impermanence, moment-to-moment life, birth, death, birth, death, birth, death, birth, death. Where are we time-wise? Quote, this body is like earth that has no subjective being. This body is like fire, devoid of ego. It's just a freight train of karma, manifesting. Boom, 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 boom. Momentum. This body is like, and so where's the ego come from? Our attachment to that train. We think that that's what makes us. But it's not. It's the instantiation of the process that makes stuff. But so what? The only import that all this stuff has is the consciousness that emerges from it. That's truly amazing. That's what's precious. This body is like wind that has no set lifespan. This body is like water devoid of individuality. Right? We want to identify every drop of the ocean, but be amazed by the ocean. This body has no reality but makes these four elements its lodging. This body is void, removed from self and self's possessions. It's all about egotistical attachment to selfness. How many words can we put around this? This body is without understanding, right? That's the province of the mind. Like plants or trees, tiles or pebbles, this body is without positive action. Because who takes action? What takes action? Other than the mind. Consciousness takes action. Blown about by the wind. This body is impure, crammed with defilement and evil. Evil. There's that word again. What would we say this speaks to in Buddhist terms? Those, right? Sensual desires, those desires for appeasement, food, sex, pleasure of a physical, temporary sort, drugs, alcohol, right? So from a Buddhist perspective, that's not life-affirming. So evil, okay, that word works. As long as you understand it thus. This body is empty and unreal, though for a time you may bathe and cleanse, clothe and feed it. In the end, it must crumble and fade. You're investing in an umbrella on a windy day. This body is plague-ridden, beset by 101 ills and anxieties. You see, Buddhism doesn't distinguish between anxiety, which is a mental condition, and actual ills. In Buddhism, they're the same thing. They're things not in balance. They're things not enlightened. This body is like the abandoned well on a hillside, old age pressing in on it. This body has no fixity, but is destined for certain death. It's a temporary vessel, yeah? This body is like poisonous snakes, vengeful bandits, or an empty village, a mere coming together of components, realms, and sense fields. Right? Sense fields, things to smell, things to see, things to hear. Why do those matter? Because we have developed senses in Buddhism, consciousnesses, skandhas, in order to perceive those things. Does our nose perceive smell, or does our mind use the consciousness of smelling to create an apparatus of smelling to detect smells? Also, temporary manifestations of things. You see how Buddhism sees? Good people, a thing like this is irksome and hateful, and therefore you should seek the Buddha body. Why? Because the Buddha body is the Dharma body. It's the all-knowing, all-being engine from which everything manifests. But how can you perceive that unless you have a mind to perceive it? And that mind can only come from this apparatus of manifest or accommodative body. And the bridge between the two is the reward body. This keeps being hammered home since the very first time Shakyamuni opened his mouth. It is born from immeasurable merits and wisdom. It is born from precepts, meditation, wisdom, emancipation, and the insight of emancipation. It is born from pity, compassion, joy, and indifference. It is born of the various paramitas, such as almsgiving, keeping of the precepts, forbearance, and gentleness, assiduousness in practice, meditation, emancipation, and samadhi, wide knowledge and wisdom. It is born of expedient means, born of the 6 transcendental powers, born of the 3 understandings, born of the 37 elements of the way, born of the concentration of insight, born of the 10 powers, the 4 kinds of fearlessness, and the 18 unshared properties. Now, there's a whole list of terms you can Google. But suffice it to say, this is a list of the learnings prior to this sutra that are being embodied in what Vimalakirti. So again, he's teaching Shakyamuni's Buddhism, his elucidation of how the mind operates in daily life and what to do with it, how to live well, the Eightfold Noble Path, how to cease our obsession with possession, attachment. He's just repeating the same stuff, right? Although eloquently, as we were told at the start of this chapter. It is born of the cutting off of all things not good and the gathering in all good things, born of the truth, born of the avoidance of indulgence and laxity. Don't be lazy. When you're lazy, your desires will take over. Your computer will make notes at you that you don't need to hear. I'm sure you heard that. The body of the thus come one is born of immeasurable numbers of pure and spotless things such as these. You want the Buddha body? Just follow the behavior. Good people, if you wish to gain the Buddha body and do away with the ills that afflict all living beings, then you must set your minds on attaining Anuttara Samyak Sambodhai, perfect and complete enlightenment. Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. Set your mind to it. In this manner, the rich... Now, he's not saying Namo Myoho Renge Kyo, but as Lotus Sutra Buddhists, we know what this is pointing to, right? We know what Anuttara Samyak Sambodhai means. It's not until the Lotus Sutra that we learn the method, the foolproof method for anyone to just do that. But this is the foreboding, the training toward that understanding. In this manner, the rich man Vimalakirti used the occasion to preach the law to those who came to inquire about his illness. Hindoku-yaku, he turned poison into medicine. As a result, numberless thousands of persons were all moved to set their minds on the attainment of Anuttara Samyak Sambodhai. For various reasons, some to emulate Vimalakirti, some to do as they're told, some to do what they're inspired by Vimalakirti to do. It doesn't matter. As long as their aspiration is to enlightenment, their path is theirs. Is there a better or lesser? As long as the goal is correct, how you get there isn't as important. And that's the end of the Expedient Means chapter. Now we're going to get to the Disciples chapter. Okay. So I think you can get the structure of this teaching, right? We're just like a movie. We're establishing the characters. We're establishing the parameters, the back history of the characters. And now we're going to get into how they interplay, how they suit one another, what their examples and their deeper meaning of being in this story, the profundity of the reason for this expedient means, this storytelling. What is it unearthing? What is it opening for us to understand? What insights can we derive from this story of characters in the Vimalakirti Sutra? Thank you for being here. Thank you for following along. Download the podcast. Please like and subscribe. It means a lot to the algorithm deities. But just simply to get this Sangha to grow and help others to discover it. The whole purpose of this is to strengthen our practice, yeah? And invite others to do so. That's our Bodhisattva work. So thank you for being a participant in that. Those of you who are, I just got another donation today. Thank you very much. It doesn't matter how big or small. Well, it matters on the scope of, materialness. But the attitude, the intent, and the assistance it gives to this channel, to this school, to continue to put out information, to inculcate the support and the practice, the positivity, the firm ground for all of you to feel confident, all of us to feel confident about our practice. That's, Nichiren would say, that is maybe the most important component of our practice. Because without this kind of an overwhelming urge for Buddha-ness, we're just blah, blah, blahing and collecting stuff and ritual and, all the stuff that people would put it down for. It is your mental dedication to your enlightenment that makes enlightenment occur. If you don't believe that your enlightenment is innate and that you can enact it, live it, why bother? It's all a game. It's all a social mechanism. There's plenty of those. I want to live this life fully to its maximal potential. That's what this practice is about. So thank you for your dedication, for your courage, right? I appreciate each and every one of you immensely. I'm proud of you and happy to know you. Thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next one. In the meantime, I want you to keep being here, so take care of your health, okay? You do that better than anyone. So take care of your health, physical and mental, which means keep your practice strong. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye for now.